Yep. So hi everyone. My name is Hermes. I'm a second year MCDS student, as you guys all know. And today I'm presenting my project on a marketplace for behavior change, which we are tentatively calling Nudge. So quick outline, we'll do a project overview. We'll look at the relationship to prior work. We'll look at some project requirements, and then we'll look at the design overview, the experimental design, results and analysis, and then some future work. So yeah, Nudge is based on a lot of different ideas, but the main ones are drawn from behavioral economics and psychology. And from these fields, the most relevant ideas are that of mimetic desire. So mimetic desire is a concept first formulated by the philosopher Rene Girard in 1700s about basically arguing that we desire what other people desire because we imitate their desires and we seek to be like them. We also draw inspiration from some HCI courses that I've taken and some books that I've read, specifically social identity theory, the idea that how we view ourselves as individuals is largely dependent on the context and social identity and social groups that we're a part of. And also the idea that subtle changes in our environment, in our choice architecture, can really change our decisions and our behavior. And finally, we also draw on some work done by Shoshana Zuboff, who basically is arguing that the right notification at the right time can actually lead to profound changes in our behavior, and that targeted advertising is sort of dominating our lives in ways that we don't currently understand at the moment. And Nudge is really just an attempt to sort of democratize this whole process. So we know that all these things are acting behind the scenes, but kind of making this a little bit more available to the everyday consumer, or to the everyday person. So I'll be a little bit more specific as to like the problem that we're trying to solve. And the problem that we're trying to solve is that of large scale behavior change. So there's certain types of behavior that we obviously would want to promote, right? So the examples that I've shown here are probably stuff that are related to recycling or attending protests or participating in causes that you care about. But their current methods for these sorts of behavior change are like pretty limited. So if you look at something like the Black Lives Matter movement, they rely pretty heavily on hashtags like word of mouth, social media, that sort of thing. But they're limited in their reach, right? A lot of it's performative. You're kind of just reposting stuff. You don't get good quantifiable metrics on who's actually doing these things. And you don't have a lot of targeting, right? So, you don't see the same level of targeting that we see with advertisements or these other things that large corporations have. And the same is true of governments, right? So governments obviously spend a lot of time thinking about how to impact large scale behavior changes. And that's actually a lot of the stuff that nudge theory talks about. And the main ways that governments sort of implement behavior change are through ads, some commercial ads, but mostly through mandates, policies, tax incentives, and that sort of thing. But through our research, we kind of found that, a lot of this stuff is costly to implement. There's a long turnaround time between, a government wants people to start doing X, and then by the time a policy gets passed and people actually start doing it, and there's little to no targeting, right? They're not able to really target specific users. But at the same time, we're bombarded almost every day with all of these, ads and stuff like that. So you can see, even when I'm driving here, on Waze, people are advertising me to go here. There's advertisements on my Instagram, like all over the place, right? And it's well known, like just in popular culture and just in the, I guess the zeitgeist of today, we're always talking about how we're subtly being influenced by all these different, avenues, but we're not being influenced in ways that people care about, like, to go recycle, to go to protest, whatever it is, be a healthier individual. They're mostly to buy products. And, I don't have access to these tools if I myself want to influence other people's behavior. And that's really the problem statement that we're trying to solve. So now I'll kind of present, so that's kind of the basic setup of the problem. And now I'll kind of present a quick diagram of what nudge exactly is. So here you can see that we basically want to promote behaviors, right? And you could promote behaviors by directly nudging individuals, and I'll go into that later in the presentation. There's a lot of ways one might try to do that, but it's quite difficult. So the other alternative path to sort of get individuals to do certain things is if you are in this sort of first category here of trying to promote behaviors, you can sort of create these crowdsourced fundable campaigns that anyone can invest in or care about or create. And this will incentivize people who are well-known, such as TikTok creators, influencers, etc. And the right influencers will then compete to generate the most interesting content that satisfies your campaign in question, which will create this interesting motivational content that will ultimately push to nudge certain individuals. So the general idea is we have built an MVP application that allows people to sort of do this whole process. And I'll go through, I think, some example videos to kind of help show how that works. But before I do that, I'll first just kind of give a little bit of intuition on why we think TikTok is sort of the way to go. So if you are unaware of what TikTok is, it's an extremely popular app focused entirely on content. So previously, right, like Facebook and Twitter, you sign up because all your friends are on it, right? But people go on TikTok not because their friends are on it, but because it's just serving them content that they just continuously want to consume, right? And it's a massive machine learning algorithm that's just basically taking binary input, some other input about how much time you spend on the app, but mostly whether or not you swiped up or down within a certain amount of time. And it's been highlighted to be extremely addictive. Wall Street Journal did a whole kind of investigation on how this thing is able to kind of figure out who you are within just a couple. I think they did it in like a couple hours, right? So then it's serving you content that you exactly want. And we believe that this targeted advertising system is actually very powerful, and we want to be able to leverage this for what we're trying to accomplish. So here's an example video. I'm unsure if it. So I'll see if I can make this full screen. I'll sort of pause the video at different points too to kind of highlight how we envision this thing to work. Taking a second to load here. Okay, here we go. Oh. Okay, it seems like when I go full screen. Okay, here. I don't know how the quality is coming through, but here is the basic idea. This would be the, I don't know if you guys can see, but this is the campaign view. So as a person who is interested in funding or looking at campaigns, you can kind of scroll through and they're sort of segmented based on category. And you can see that there's fun ones. There's one related to activism, perhaps, and related to health. If you're interested in kind of joining one of these campaigns or adding money, you can click in it and you see a more detailed view of the different influencers that you're kind of being able to target with this particular campaign. So you'll see that like for this campaign specifically, 139 influencers have completed it. There's a current amount of funding. And really the big value out here is that, and I'll get into this more throughout the process, but there's certain types of influencers that are better at spreading certain types of messages. And the idea here is that our algorithm or our ability to be able to target specific types of influencers who then compete to kind of complete this campaign and win the money. These influencers are going to be the best at spreading the message. So you can see here that based on the amount of funding, you're reaching the top 28% of influencers based on their following count, based on their reach. And you kind of see the type of influencer that you're reaching. And you can sort of see the current impact, right? 25,000 people have looked at it. There's an X amount of shares and so forth. So that would just be from just a normal person standpoint. If you're interested in creating a campaign, you basically can specify an end date for the campaign. You pick a category of type of campaign, that sort of thing. We can go into, this is pretty straightforward, that sort of thing. We can skip ahead here. And then as a TikToker, right? So you quote sort of, so this would be an example person who has a lot of followers. There may be an influencer that is related to music, art, whatever. And they'll only get sort of campaigns that are targeted towards them and who have already gotten some amount of funding that reaches their level of influence. So, you funded $20,000, you're reaching the top, campaign or influencers who can actually spread that message, much more effectively. And okay, yep, let me get rid of this and then, oops, sorry. Yep, so that was the example video. Yeah, so these are some more views. So why do we believe this works? So there's a couple reasons, right? So there's some of them I'm already mentioned, right? But there's this idea of mimetic behavior. There's also this idea that people are extremely social creatures that essentially just follow what other people do. So there's a famous Solomon Asch experiment that we can go into. And also people just like to do things that are fun, right? So there's a lot of experiments done in Taiwan and in other countries where you can get people to recycle, you can get people to exercise more just by making these activities more engaging. So they had stairs, and the stairs, if you play certain songs or notes, as you jumped up and down the stairs, people took the stairs much more often than they took the elevator, that sort of thing. TikTok is super fun, and it's kind of one of the reasons why we think it's powerful. And then finally, there's a lot of historical kind of research shown on the power of like celebrities. So I'll go into more detail about BTS particularly as a phenomenon, but they're a group of influencers who are able to enact large-scale social change just through their influence and their platform. Yeah, so that's the general problem statement. That's kind of what we were trying to accomplish. We had a couple hypotheses. So first, that there's a sufficient field of TikTok influencers who would be interested in using something like this. And also that behavior change can actually be implemented on such a large scale via TikTok. And that we believe that the current methods of behavior change we would be more effective using our method as opposed to the previous methods that I described. Right. So then in order to kind of test these hypotheses, we had 3 project goals, right? So the first was sort of just doing an in-depth background research on the scope of TikTok, the recent trends, understanding the current influencer economy. And step 2, which was really the largest part, was just mocking up different designs, Figma prototypes, Swift prototypes, some of which we just saw, and then going through a series of user interviews to kind of iterate on the idea and the scope. And then ultimately deploy everything and test sort of different marketplace dynamics on the App Store, which I'll also go into more detail. Before I go into that, I guess I'll go into some prior work that's been done. So the first prior work is obviously on behavior economics. So there's this idea of anchoring, right? So if someone speaks very confidently about something, so if the 3 of us were asked to estimate the price of that share, for example, and then Professor Nyberg very confidently as an individual says up and says, this is $500. Even if I originally thought it was $20 or I had some other estimate, I'm going to anchor to his estimate because he's a confident, intelligent individual, and I'm going to kind of follow what he says. The same could be true of like the top 10 songs on Spotify. So they've done these experiments where it's actually irrelevant the quality of the song necessarily. It's really what are the top 10 songs that get to be the top 10 songs first. And then once they're top 10, they kind of tend to stay as top 10 because people just listen to what other people are doing. And there's many more examples, but those are the things that I think are most important to our conversation today. Others are just descriptive norms. So people tend to do things that other people like them do. So if I see an influencer who I want to be like, or who I view myself as part of, I'm a 25-year-old male. I exercise a lot. If I see someone who's also exercising a lot, maybe competing in triathlons, I'm much more likely to do what this person tells me to do. And we see that with experiments where, if they ask you, 70% of guests in this hotel actually use their towels more than once, you're much more likely to recycle your towels because, oh, those are people like me. And then if you even narrow it down even more and just say 70% of the guests, 75% of the guests who stayed in this specific room use their towels more than once, you're even more likely to not, ask the cleaning service to sort of take your towels. So we're drawing a lot of inspiration from psychology here. We're also drawing inspiration from the music industry. So right now, the way that music is kind of being advertised, the music industry has changed a lot, right? Since Napster, Spotify, and all this stuff. And right now, actually, the way that most songs are being propagated is through this thing called pair pop. So right now, it's not really about chorus or refrain or whatever it is. It's really about what is the viral snippet of my song that can go large on TikTok. And there's a platform right now where influencers actually do get paid to help promote certain songs. Basically, you're, maybe Justin Bieber or Taylor Swift, and you want to get your song out there. The way you do that is actually to try to get influencers to make a fun dance or whatever it is. But there's a lot of limitations to this. So again, it's obviously limited to music and large brands. There's no matchmaking process per se. Like you're just an influencer and you're browsing through all these challenges. And there's no crowdfunding. Like if I wanted to invest in people, maybe I don't care about music, but I care about something else, I can't actually invest in this process. I'm not a participant in this economy right now. Okay, so now I'll go into some project requirements. Obviously, we have 2 main sets of intended users. We have creators, the people who actually want to create different campaigns, and they need to be able to see what the submissions are. So they need to be able. They need to be able to specify the type of challenge, the influencers they want to reach, the type of influencers they want to have access to. They need to be able to see the campaign, and they need to see the current reach of the campaign, and also specify an end date. And then for the creators themselves, they need to be able to see other submissions, right? So they need to see what their competition is. They need to understand the intent of the challenge, and then obviously receive payment for the video at the conclusion of the date, and then also link their video to the challenge. But there's actually all these other downstream effects who are part of this economy, right? So there's people who are just investors who I imagine will still be a significant portion of the population who just kind of go on the application and say, these are the things that I want to invest in, and these are the causes that I care about, and I want to have influence kind of talk about this. And then there's the actual targeted folks. So if you guys remember the very original diagram that I showed, like the people we actually want to nudge, And like I said in the beginning, originally we wanted to nudge those people directly, but we found that problem to be very, very difficult. So that's why we kind of went on this path of using influencers. And these people might seem kind of outside the scope of what we're talking about here, but they are actually the end person that we want to influence, right? And these are the people who watch the videos, who subtly have their behavior and beliefs change as a various of all these psychological theories that we've kind of been researching and describing above. And the idea here is that a competition marketplace where TikTokers are competing to win the $10,000 or whatever the challenge is, will lead to the most interesting content that actually drives most people to do the thing that we're interested in doing. So there's a couple of non-functional requirements, right? So the first one is obviously modifiability. This is probably the most important one, given that we're framing this project really as an exploratory HCI kind of understanding project of what people like, what people don't like, and whether or not this would actually work in practice. Nothing like this, to my knowledge, has ever been done. So it needs to be able to iterate very quickly. The other thing is data privacy. So I mentioned in the beginning, one of the main motivations for this project is social justice movements, but also governmental campaigns, and not just, getting people to sign up for retirement savings or whatever, but just governments want people to do things that are often very important. And if the government is involved, then security is also very important. Yeah, so this kind of leads to the resource requirements. In order to build things that were fast, we use Figma. Ultimately, we will have access to the TikTok API, which uses their software development is currently limited to Swift. So we use Macintosh to kind of build out the Swift code. And then for our backend, we're using Google Firebase, which is easily modifiable and secure, which kind of helps satisfy some of those non-functional requirements. The actual versions that we use are specified here. And yeah, so here's a quick design overview of the application. We had some constraints, right? So we had to use the TikTok developer API, which is, it constrains us to certain iOS versions and Xcodes. We made some assumptions that the TikTok login kit would be sufficient for our application, and also that iPhone users would have access to the internet via standard web browsers, and our system environment was Google Firebase. So here's a system architecture, right? So there's a web browser, which leads to a standard, this is a simple microservice architecture where it leads into a load balancer, which is kind of balancing out the load. This goes into a web app server, which is made up of 3 different microservices, a login module, which is responsible for handling whether or not you're a creator or a campaigner. And then basically this will log you in, and then based on once you're logged in, these different modules will then communicate with the database that's storing all of the campaigns and then storing all of the different TikToks associated with each campaign. And the way that we want to constantly keep this updated list, at least for now, is to have a separate virtual machine running that is sort of querying the TikTok infrastructure and updating our cloud database. Okay, now I'll go into the experimental design and basically the process of what we were going through. So the first part is obviously going through and understanding TikTok. So this is going through different publicly available resources, documenting the rise of TikTok and aggregating information from a lot of pre-existing research. And also kind of just looking at new features coming out in TikTok itself. The second stage is obviously involves some substantial user interviews and studies. So this was more exploration of the idea. We were looking at computer science graduate students, and we also looked at some employees in government who I was connected to through friends of friends over the summer. And then also, yeah, and the way this worked was I was kind of interviewing them and typing up their responses in a private Google form. We also had a secondary stage where we had some Figma designs, and then we did basically interview the same people, but with some more context now. So the idea had now progressed, and now we're looking at these are actual ways in which this might manifest. How does this actually look? And then from there, we continue iterating on the idea, more research. Now we're building out the different Swift prototypes, and then again we're doing the same things, but now we're interviewing people who are a little bit more qualified to speak about the topic. So I was able to connect with 2 people who are actual either former influencers or current influencers at Carnegie Mellon, and they were able to actually interact with the prototype, not just look at different Figma designs. Yeah, so here's some results and analysis. So here's the first thing, TikTok user engagement. So just some basic stats. As of July 2022, TikTok had over 1.6 billion monthly active users compared to 1.6 billion active users, but it reached that point in just a few years, where it took Facebook about 7.7 years to reach 1 billion users, and Instagram about 8.7 years to reach that same milestone, right? So the rate of change here, the derivative for TikTok kind of rising is very high, and we can see that the target demographic of TikTok is also in the low range. So this is just user engagement by age, and we can see that the 10 to 30 age range is kind of the biggest group here. And you can see though that despite that being the biggest group in just the last 18 months, so this was actually in 2019, but US adults who are using TikTok is also growing rapidly, right? And then TikTok is also a massive time suck, right? So out of all of the in the attention economy, as we call it these days, TikTok is 100% leading the war, with the average amount of time people spending on it about 45.8 minutes a day. And there's also now this actually, this is actually a good time because there's this growing creator economy. So TikTok is actually launching a creator fund, which is basically a $1 billion fund that's just paying users based on the virality of their content. And then there's also this gift system where just if you're a fan, you really care about this content, you can actually just gift influencers themselves. So there is this there's precedent for this influencer economy that's kind of happening behind the scenes through sponsorships and all this other stuff. I won't go through this too much detail, but we also did some studies on like just the trends and how much of a reach that TikTok can actually get. So using TikTok's API, and this was done on December 10th, just a few days ago, just the most recent 100 videos was able to reach something like, this is 1 billion likes and 12,000 comments, whatever. And over 20 million videos were created. And this is a trend called a hashtag I'll never forget you. And I can go into more statistics. But the real thing that I want to highlight here is that we can compare this with like how things were working before. So the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, I don't know if you guys remember that. That was a really popular thing, right? And that reached 17 million people, which is kind of crazy. But this is actually kind of the norm that's happening on a daily basis on TikTok. So that kind of reach, that kind of impact that we might see in terms of impact on donations and so forth, that could be leveraged on a large scale for causes that people actually care about on TikTok currently. And then there's all these studies of BTS. So BTS in 2020 during the Black Lives Matter, when that was kind of really getting a lot of traction, they made one tweet, say match our donation, and in under 24 hours, their entire army of followers were able to donate about $1 million to a charity of their choice. Okay, I know I've been speaking for quite some time, so I'm going to try to go through this a little faster. These are some interviews that we did. So this was the first round. Basically, this was during the ideation stage, and they were kind of confirming that emotional contagion is a real thing, that they're more likely to change their behavior when they're in a positive mood. When they're in a negative mood, they stick to things that make them feel better, and that peer pressure is the main motivation for their behavior change. That when they see their friends do something, they're much more likely to do it themselves. This was and then this is another interview that we did with a government employee who works for a state senator. And they're arguing basically that, the target audience, at least for their social media outreach, is in the 15 to 28 age range, right in the range of TikTok. And in the past 5 years, in their opinion, most of it has switched, the budget has really switched to social media outreach and communication. And they're really frustrated with this kind of long turnaround for results that actually start trickling in for behavior change. And then of course, I would just have to know some limitations. These are small sample sizes. I'm doing the interviews and I'm also the person who's working on this application. Ideally, you want to separate those two things out. And the slice of the population I'm looking at is obviously people who are similar to me or people who I have access to. So there's a bias there. So these were some initial ideas. I won't go into what the initial ideas of this application were, but these initial ideas often revolve creating our own tokens, our own monetary system, and having people nudge other people directly. And a lot of the feedback that we got there was that there's no really motivation to download. There's no monetary incentives. The workflow itself that we designed here was actually very intuitive, but people, the entry point, there's no reason for someone to go out and actually do this, right? And that helped us lead to other iterations of the idea, which were more focused on TikTok itself and ultimately kind of converge on what we are talking about today. So once we went through those 2 rounds of interview processes and kind of iterated on the idea to the point that you see now, this was when we kind of built out the first Swift application. And this is when we reached a TikTok influencer at CMU who kind of we chatted about TikTok, her experience with it, and her general attitude toward behavior change. So this is the first version of the app. We don't have to go, I don't know how long it'll take for the video to load. The first version of the app is quite different, but does not have this influencer matching system that I described above. It does not necessarily show as many metrics of like what influencers are doing and that sort of thing, like how many influencers participated, how much money was spent. So that was the first version of the app, which she really kind of helped leverage out through her own experiences on TikTok and saying that as an influencer, these are not things that we would be actually concerned with. I'll just skip that since it's taking some time and move on. And then this kind of leads to the final version of the app, which I already showed. And then we were able to also talk to a former digital marketer who kind of gave us some further insights, which is that for her, the quantification of this is actually huge, right? So before, as a marketer, someone who's spreading campaigns, they had no idea the reach that they were getting, and what sort of impact they were having. And she was really on top of this idea. Once the analogy to the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge was kind of given, she really understood the concept. And for her, that's actually the core power of this application. And that's the thing that she would try to leverage is like, you're not going to be creative enough to come up with the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, but 1,000 people who do this for a living will definitely, at least one of them will succeed, right? But she was saying, there's a big problem with monitoring, right? How do you know that certain applications work and certain videos are PC and that sort of thing? And this is the current stage where, we're still working on actually getting everything deployed on the App Store. It's definitely a lot harder than I thought. But these are the sort of questions that we're trying to answer, like what campaigns get most influencer participation. So we're not going to have users be able to input campaigns at the moment, even though I showed that in the prototype, but it's just going to be a fixed backend. And it's just seeing what types of influencers join and what is the dose responses in terms of, if I fund it with 10x more money, do I get 10x more influencers? What does that relationship look like? And then, yeah, finally, these are some future directions, that I would like to take. What determines better influencers? So right now the algorithm is just looking at the number of followers you have, but there's other metrics, right? Like daily engagement, average number of likes, all these sorts of things. So we want to figure out what exactly that looks like. What does that matchmaking process look like? And how do we keep influencers in check, right? Like, how do we make sure that they're not just making random videos? And then ultimately, actually, I think this whole thing should transition into a completely decentralized network, something like smart contracts, where people are actually just doing these things, and we have automatic verification of the video, and we're using something like Ethereum or some other crypto token to pay users for this. And there's more details, obviously, in the final report. But yeah, I just wanted to also say special thanks to my two advisors who were just trying to help along the way. Yeah, sorry, I know I went over time, but yeah, that's my presentation. Thanks for listening.
All right, thanks, Hermes. Great job.
Yeah, so we have a couple of minutes, so I think we have until 3:20.
So I guess the real question about this capstone is sort of, is it an analytics capstone? I don't think so. I think it's more like you did a bunch of successive designs for sort of an HCI system to kind of explore these ideas, right?
Yeah.
But you don't yet have any campaigns that you've actually done.
Yeah, that's true.
So how would you describe kind of the actual? So I think your hypotheses were very, very general and very, very broad. And those are hypotheses that one would have to espouse in order to even start on this work. But I think some, smaller, more narrowly scoped hypotheses, you actually satisfy. And so, is it possible, to prototype some designs and wireframe them and get feedback? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Is it possible to think about the right kind of incentive system? Yes, it is. So I think I'll have to read the final report, but I think right now there's sort of a what's next,
Okay.
kind of feeling to it.
Sure.
So have you actually got in mind what your first campaign will be?
Yeah, one thing that I would like to try is just recycling, and I would like to see, one thing we thought about was like if we had we could see, like, we could try out a different campaign where we put in $10, right, and then just whoever creates X amount, and then just see who signs up for it. This was more applicable in previous iterations of the idea, but I think it ended up being the case that because it's so based on TikTok influencers, it's hard to like run the A/B kind of tests and actually see that, like, run statistical tests and see how much actually changed. So yeah, it's a little unclear just because the idea changed so much over the course of like how we would actually test it, but something I would like to do.
So and then I hope in the final report you also because the value of everything you did is going to be in reading about the journey
Yeah.
through all of this. show the slides, it's great, but I think, for example, being able to read the details of how the design progressed.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, also. All right, so we're gonna break now, so we can give up the room to the next guys. I'll
Awesome.
let you know if I have any other questions based on the final report.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank